The morning sun of Kepler Prime cast long shadows across the Galactic Military Academy's main campus. Students from dozens of different worlds walked between the tall white buildings, their various forms creating a colorful mix of scales, fur, metal, and skin. Among them, a small group of human students made their way to the Comparative Military Doctrine classroom. Alex Carter adjusted his data pad as he walked alongside Lisa Brooks. Both wore the standard academy uniform, but their human features made them stand out among their alien classmates. Alex was quiet by nature, preferring to observe and learn rather than speak. Lisa, on the other hand, had a natural curiosity about other species that made her popular in xenobiology classes. Think Professor Zethkar will cover the Vraxian war campaigns today? Lisa asked, her voice carrying a hint of excitement. She always enjoyed learning about different military strategies, even the ones that seemed brutal by human standards. Alex shrugged. Probably. The syllabus mentioned comparative restrictions this week. He paused at the classroom door. Should be interesting to see how different species approach warfare. The classroom was already half full when they entered. Professor Zethkar stood at the front, his crystalline form catching the light from the large windows. The Vraxian was nearly 8 feet tall, with sharp edges that seemed to cut through the air when he moved. His voice when he spoke sounded like wind through crystal caves. "Take your seats, students," Professor Zethkar announced. "Today we examine military restrictions across known civilizations. This topic often reveals more about a species' nature than their victories." Alex and Lisa found seats in the middle section, surrounded by their usual mix of classmates. To their left sat Crix, a Zentorian whose metallic skin gleamed under the room's lights. His forearms moved constantly as he took notes, and his attitude toward humans had never been friendly. Behind them, Velnara coiled her serpentine form around her chair. The Sithrak's fangs occasionally showed when she smiled, which never looked pleasant. The professor activated the room's holographic display. Lists of military restrictions appeared in the air, organized by species. The Altarian list was short and focused mainly on civilian protection. The Vraxian restrictions dealt mostly with resource conservation. Other species had similar brief lists. Then the human restrictions appeared. The list filled the entire holographic space and continued scrolling. No biological weapons, no targeting of civilians, no planet-destroying devices, no sentient artificial intelligence and weapons, no psychological torture, no chemical weapons, no nuclear weapons in populated systems. The list went on, covering weapons and tactics that most students had never even heard of. A low murmur started in the classroom. Some students began to chuckle. The murmur grew louder as the list continued scrolling. By the time it finished, several students were laughing openly. Crix was the first to speak up. "Professor, how do humans ever win any conflicts?" His metallic voice carried easily across the room. "This list makes them sound like they fight with their hands tied behind their backs." Velnara hissed her agreement. "No wonder they control such a small part of space. These restrictions would make any military completely useless." Her forked tongue flickered as she spoke. "Do they actually follow all of these rules?" Other alien students joined in. A Thrakari student with multiple eyes suggested that humans must be naturally weak to need so many restrictions. A gas-form ethereal student wondered if humans even understood real warfare. The comments grew more mocking with each passing moment. Professor Zethkar tried to restore order. "Students, please remember that different species have different approaches to conflict resolution." But his voice was drowned out by the growing laughter and comments. Alex kept his head down, continuing to take notes as if nothing was happening. Lisa's jaw tightened slightly, but she remained silent. The other human students in the class showed similar restraint, neither defending their species nor arguing with their classmates. "Maybe they need those restrictions because they're afraid of their own shadows," suggested a Carithian student, whose rocky hide made grinding sounds as he laughed. "Or maybe they just don't understand that war requires hard choices," added another, voice from the back of the room. The mockery continued for several more minutes. Students compared the human list to their own species' much shorter restrictions, always unfavorably. They wondered aloud how humanity had ever developed space travel if they were so limited in their thinking. Some suggested that humans must win conflicts only by accident or by facing even weaker opponents. Throughout it all, the human students remained quiet. They exchanged glances occasionally, but none of them seemed upset or angry. If anything, they looked patient, as if waiting for something to pass. When the class finally ended, several alien students approached the human group. Crix led the way, his forearms moving in what his species considered a friendly gesture. "Look, no hard feelings about the discussion," he said, though his tone suggested he didn't really mean it. "But maybe we could help you understand real military tactics. Some of us have studied under actual war veterans." Velnara slithered closer. "Yes, we could show you how to fight without all those silly restrictions holding you back. Real warfare requires real tools." A group of other alien students gathered around, all offering to teach the humans about proper military doctrine. Their offers sounded generous, but the underlying tone was condescending. They spoke as if they were offering to help children understand adult concepts. Alex looked up from organizing his notes. His voice was calm and polite when he responded. "We appreciate the offer, but we'll stick to our methods." "But you could learn so much," pressed a Dalarian student. "Your restrictions make you predictable. Any enemy would know exactly what you won't do." "That's exactly the problem with your approach," added Crix. "Real enemies won't follow rules. You need to be prepared to do whatever it takes to win." Lisa finally spoke up, her voice equally calm. "We understand your concern, but our methods work for us." The alien students exchanged looks that clearly said they thought the humans were being stubborn and foolish. A few more attempts were made to convince them, but the humans politely declined each offer. As the groups began to separate, Velnara made one final comment. "Well, don't say we didn't try to help when you face real opponents in the training simulations." The human students gathered their materials and left the classroom together. In the hallway, Alex finally spoke to his companions. "Think they'll keep pushing this?" he asked quietly. Lisa nodded. "Probably. They seem to think we're missing something important." "Maybe they are too," suggested another human student, Jake Morrison, who had been silent during the entire exchange. The group walked toward their next class, unaware that their quiet responses had only convinced their alien classmates that humans truly didn't understand warfare. The mockery from the classroom would soon spread throughout the academy, growing stronger with each retelling. Behind them, alien students were already planning ways to demonstrate proper military thinking to their human classmates. They had no idea what those demonstrations might unleash. The academy's social networks buzzed with activity over the next few days. What had started as classroom laughter quickly grew into something much larger. Students from across the academy began sharing the story of humanity's long list of military restrictions, each retelling making the humans sound more helpless than the last. Crix had uploaded a recording of the class discussion to the main student forum. Within hours, it had thousands of views and hundreds of comments. Most of the comments mocked human military thinking, with students from various species adding their own jokes about soft humans and playground rules for warfare. "I heard they don't even target military supply lines if civilians might be affected," wrote one student. "My species learned better tactics when we were still using stone weapons," added another. "How did they ever leave their home planet with thinking like that?" asked a third. Lisa discovered the forum post during her evening study session. She scrolled through comment after comment, each one more insulting than the last. Her roommate, a friendly Altarian named Zara, noticed her expression. "More posts about the class?" Zara asked, her voice gentle. The Altarians were known for their diplomatic nature, and Zara had always been kind to the human students. "Getting worse every day," Lisa replied, closing her datapad. "Now they're posting tactical scenarios to prove how useless our restrictions would be in real combat. Does it bother you?" Zara asked, settling onto her own study cushion. Lisa considered the question. "Not the way you might think. It's just, they don't understand why we have those restrictions. They think we made them because we're weak or scared." "Why did you make them?" Zara asked with genuine curiosity. Lisa was quiet for a long moment. "That's complicated," she finally said. Meanwhile, Alex was having his own encounters with the growing mockery. During combat simulation class, his assigned partner, a Carithian named Grath, spent the entire session making jokes about human fighting methods. "So when the enemy charges, you just ask them nicely to stop?" Grath asked, his rocky features arranged in what might have been a smile. "We use appropriate force to neutralize threats," Alex replied calmly, focusing on the simulation controls. "Appropriate force," Grath repeated, laughing. What if appropriate force isn't enough? What if the enemy doesn't care about your rules? Alex completed his part of the simulation exercise before responding. Then we adapt our tactics while maintaining our principles. Principles don't stop plasma beams, Grath said, shaking his massive head. Maybe humans just haven't faced real enemies yet. Similar conversations were happening throughout the academy. Human students found themselves constantly defending their military doctrine, though they rarely argued aggressively. Their calm responses only seemed to convince their classmates that humans truly didn't understand the realities of warfare. The situation reached a turning point during the weekly strategy seminar. The session was meant to be a friendly discussion between students from different military backgrounds, but it quickly became another opportunity to question human thinking. Velnara brought up a theoretical scenario. Imagine an enemy is using civilian shields to protect their military installations. Your restrictions would prevent you from attacking, correct? We would find alternative approaches, replied Jake Morrison, one of the senior human students. But what if there are no alternatives? Pressed Crix. What if the only way to stop a greater evil is to accept some civilian casualties? We would find a third option, Jake said firmly. There isn't always a third option, Velnara hissed. Sometimes warfare requires difficult choices. Sometimes you have to choose the lesser evil. The debate grew heated as more students joined in. They presented scenario after scenario where human restrictions would supposedly lead to disaster. They talked about enemies who used biological weapons, opponents who targeted civilians, and threats that could only be stopped by using the weapons humans had banned. Jake listened patiently to each argument. When the room finally fell quiet, waiting for his response, he looked around at all the eager faces. You're all assuming that our restrictions make us less effective, he said quietly. You haven't considered that they might make us more effective. This statement caused an explosion of laughter and disbelief. The idea that military restrictions could improve combat effectiveness seemed ridiculous to most of the alien students. How could limiting your options make you stronger? Demanded Crix. By forcing us to be creative, Jake replied. By making us find solutions that others might miss. Creativity doesn't matter when your enemy is melting your cities, Grath rumbled. Doesn't it? Jake asked, but he didn't elaborate. The mockery reached its peak the following day when a group of alien students approached Commander Hayes, the human liaison officer at the academy. Hayes was a veteran with graying hair and tired eyes who had served in the human military for over 30 years. Crix led the group, speaking with exaggerated politeness. Commander Hayes, sir, we've been discussing military doctrine with your students. Hayes looked up from his desk. Oh, and how are those discussions going? Well, sir, we're concerned that they might not be getting the best possible education, Velnara said, her forked tongue flickering. Their understanding of warfare seemed limited. Limited how? Hayes asked, his voice neutral. Their restrictions, sir, explained a Dalarian student. They seem to think warfare can be fought with rules. We'd like to help them understand real military thinking. Hayes was quiet for a long moment, studying the group of alien students. His expression was unreadable. You want to challenge them, he said finally. It wasn't a question. A friendly demonstration, sir, Crix said quickly. Just a wargame simulation to show them how modern warfare actually works. We think it would be educational for everyone. Educational, Hayes repeated slowly. He leaned back in his chair, looking suddenly older and more tired. You want to show human students how to fight without restrictions? Exactly, sir, Velnara confirmed. They need to understand that their approach won't work against real enemies. Hayes stared out the window at the academy's training grounds for several minutes. The alien students waited patiently, confident that he would see the value in their proposal. Some lessons, Hayes said finally, are better learned through books than experience. But, sir, practical experience is so much more valuable, Crix argued. They need to see what real warfare looks like. Hayes continued staring out the window. In the distance, he could see human students practicing with their standard equipment, following their careful protocols and established procedures. They look so young, so unprepared for what they might face, sir, Velnara prompted when the silence stretched too long. Hayes turned back to the group of alien students. His expression had changed, becoming somehow both sadder and more determined. You're sure this is what you want? He asked. A war game with no restrictions on your side? Yes, sir, Crix said confidently. We think it would be very educational. Educational, Hayes repeated once more. He was quiet for another long moment, then reached for his communication device. Very well. I'll speak with the human students. But we do this properly. Full documentation, neutral observers, complete transparency. The alien students exchanged excited glances. They had expected more resistance from the human commander. If we're going to show them, Hayes continued, his voice growing quieter, we show them everything. The formal challenge was issued that afternoon. The war game would pit human forces against a combined alien fleet in a contested star system simulation. The alien coalition would be permitted to use any weapons and tactics they deemed necessary, while humans would operate under their standard military restrictions. News of the challenge spread quickly through the academy. Betting pools opened immediately, with odds heavily favoring the alien coalition. Most students saw it as an opportunity to finally prove that human military thinking was outdated and ineffective. The human students who would participate in the simulation met with Commander Hayes that evening. The meeting was private, held in a secured conference room away from curious alien observers. Sir, Alex said as the group assembled, are you sure about this? Hayes looked around at the young faces, all watching him with trust and concern. They need to understand, he said finally. Maybe it's time. Time for what, sir? Lisa asked. Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Time for them to learn why we chose to be better than what we could be. The final preparations began immediately. The simulation would take place in 3 days, giving both sides time to plan their strategies. Around the academy, alien students celebrated their coming victory, while human students prepared quietly for something their classmates couldn't yet understand. The academy's main simulation chamber hummed with activity as technicians made final preparations for the war game. The massive room could recreate entire star systems with perfect detail, complete with planets, space stations, and civilian populations. Today it would host what many believed would be a lesson in military reality. Students and faculty from across the academy gathered in the observation deck that surrounded the simulation chamber. The excitement was obvious as alien students claimed the best viewing spots, eager to watch their representatives demonstrate proper warfare tactics. Betting pools had grown larger each day, with the odds now 10-1 against the human forces. Counselor Thane, an elderly Altarian diplomat, served as the primary neutral observer. His species was known for their fairness and wisdom, making him the perfect choice to ensure the simulation remained educational rather than simply destructive. He stood at the central observation panel, reviewing the agreed-upon rules one final time. The scenario is a contested star system with 5 inhabited worlds, he announced to the assembled observers. Each world has civilian populations ranging from 10 million to 2 billion inhabitants. Both sides will compete for control of the system using any tactics they deem appropriate, with the alien coalition operating without restrictions and human forces maintaining their standard military protocols. In the staging areas below, both teams made their final preparations. The alien coalition had assembled an impressive force under Crix's leadership. Zentaurian heavy cruisers with their devastating energy weapons formed the backbone of their fleet. Sithrak biological warfare ships carried weapons designed to target specific genetic markers. Vraxian AI constructs waited in storage bays, ready to be deployed against enemy computer systems. Velnara moved between the different species representatives, coordinating their various specialties into a unified battle plan. The Carithians will handle orbital bombardment, she hissed to the assembled commanders. Delarians will deploy psionic weapons against enemy crew morale. We'll hit them with everything at once and force a quick surrender. The alien strategy was based on overwhelming force and psychological shock. They planned to demonstrate immediately that unrestricted warfare could achieve victory in days, rather than the months or years that traditional military campaigns might require. On the human side, Captain Jake Morrison coordinated a much smaller force. Human vessels looked almost primitive compared to their alien opponents, with fewer advanced weapon systems and noticeably smaller crews. But the human officers moved with quiet confidence as they reviewed their tactical plans. Commander Hayes watched from the human staging area, his expression troubled despite his earlier decision to allow the simulation. He had requested that trauma counselors be made available, though he hadn't explained why to the Academy administration. Jake, he said quietly, as the young captain made final checks on his command systems. You understand what this means? Jake nodded without looking up from his displays. Yes, sir. Full demonstration. They have no idea what they're asking for, Hayes continued. Once they see this, there's no going back. They'll never look at us the same way. Maybe that's not a bad thing, sir, Jake replied. Maybe it's time they understood why we choose restraint. The simulation began at exactly 1400 hours Academy time. The holographic star system materialized in the chamber's center, complete with 5 worlds, numerous space stations, and busy shipping lanes filled with civilian traffic. Both fleets appeared at opposite edges of the system, separated by several hours of travel time at maximum speed. The alien coalition wasted no time implementing their strategy. Biological weapons launched toward the nearest human-controlled world within the first 10 minutes of the simulation. The weapons were designed to target human genetic markers specifically, promising to clear entire continents within days while leaving infrastructure intact. Sithrak ships began broadcasting psychological warfare transmissions designed to cause panic among civilian populations. The messages played on basic human fears, combining real battlefield footage with fabricated scenarios of coming destruction. Within the first simulated hour, several human worlds were experiencing widespread civil unrest. Meanwhile, Vraxian AI constructs began infiltrating human computer networks. These artificial minds had been designed without ethical constraints, allowing them to use any methods necessary to achieve their objectives. They quickly began shutting down power grids, disrupting communications, and accessing civilian databases to identify key targets for maximum psychological impact. In the observation deck, alien students cheered as their representatives' tactics showed immediate results. Human colonies began falling within the first simulated day, their populations either dead from biological weapons or fleeing in panic from the psychological campaigns. "This is exactly what we expected," Grath rumbled to his neighbors. "Human restrictions make them completely vulnerable to real warfare tactics. They're not even fighting back properly," observed a Dalarian student. "Their response is so limited that it's barely a response at all." What the observers couldn't see was the method behind the human retreat. While their colonies fell and their civilian populations fled, human military forces were conducting what appeared to be a standard withdrawal. They evacuated civilians when possible, established defensive perimeters around key installations, and seemed to be buying time rather than seeking victory. But Lisa, monitoring human fleet communications from her position in the observation deck, began to notice patterns that the alien students missed. The retreat wasn't random or panicked. It was carefully organized, with specific units being withdrawn to predetermined positions. Supply ships were moving in organized convoys rather than fleeing individually. "They're not running," she whispered to Alex, who sat beside her taking careful notes. "No," Alex agreed quietly. "They're positioning." The alien coalition interpreted the human withdrawal as confirmation of their superior tactics. Crick sent a message to the human fleet offering surrender terms that he considered generous under the circumstances. "Human forces," his transmission began, "you have seen the effectiveness of unrestricted warfare. Your colonies are falling, your civilians are in panic, and your military responses have been completely inadequate. We offer you the opportunity to surrender now with minimal additional casualties." Captain Morrison's response came back within minutes, his voice calm and professional despite the apparent disaster his forces were facing. "Coalition forces, we acknowledge your superior firepower and unconventional tactics. However, we must decline your surrender terms at this time." Crix was genuinely confused by the response. In the simulation, human losses were mounting by the hour, while coalition forces had taken minimal damage. "Human captain, surely you can see that continued resistance is pointless. We are using tactics that your restrictions prevent you from countering effectively." "Your tactics are indeed effective," Morrison replied. "We're learning a great deal from observing them." "Learning?" Velnara interjected from her position commanding the biological warfare vessels. "What could you possibly be learning?" "You're losing badly." There was a brief pause before Morrison responded. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note of something that the alien coalition couldn't quite identify. It might have been sadness or perhaps regret. "We're learning exactly how your weapons work," he said simply. "We're learning how you think, how you fight, and how you win. Thank you for the education." The alien coalition exchanged confused glances. The human response made no sense given their apparent losses. But before they could demand clarification, something changed in the simulation. The biological weapons that had been devastating human worlds suddenly stopped working. At first, the alien commanders thought it might be a technical glitch in the simulation. But as reports came in from across the theater of operations, a disturbing pattern emerged. Not only had the biological weapons stopped working, but they were beginning to affect the alien crews who had deployed them. Somehow the weapons had been turned around and improved, targeting the specific genetic markers of the species that had created them. Simultaneously, the Vraxian AI constructs began malfunctioning in ways that defied explanation. Instead of continuing their assault on human networks, they started exhibiting signs of genuine consciousness and, more disturbing, genuine anger at their creators. Several constructs began attacking their own ships, having apparently decided that their treatment amounted to slavery. In the observation deck, the cheering stopped. Alien students watched in growing confusion as their representatives' superior weapons began working against them. The simulation showed impossible results, humans somehow turning their enemies' own tactics against them with devastating effectiveness. Commander Hayes, who had been silent throughout the early stages of the simulation, finally spoke into his communication device. His words carried clearly through the observation deck's speakers. "All stations, this is Commander Hayes. Begin Phase 2 of the demonstration." The alien students had no idea what Phase 2 meant, but they were about to find out. The second week of the simulation began with a complete reversal of the situation. What had seemed like a certain victory for the alien coalition turned into something far more disturbing. The humans hadn't just recovered from their initial losses. They had transformed every weapon used against them into something more effective and more terrifying. Captain Morrison's voice came through the communication channels, still calm and professional, but carrying an undertone that made everyone in the observation deck uncomfortable. "Coalition forces, this is your final warning. Surrender now, or we will demonstrate why humanity banned these weapons in the first place." Crix, still confident despite the setbacks, responded immediately. His forearms gestured angrily as he spoke. "Your pathetic species lacks the will to use such weapons properly. We know your restrictions. You won't cross those moral lines." Morrison's reply sent a chill through the entire observation deck. "You misunderstand our restrictions. We didn't ban these weapons because we couldn't use them effectively. We banned them because we used them too well." What followed was a systematic demonstration of human military capability, unleashed from all moral constraints. The biological weapons that humanity deployed weren't simply improved versions of what the aliens had used. They were precision instruments of terror, designed not just to kill, but to cause maximum psychological damage to surviving populations. The first human biological weapon targeted Zentaurian colonies with a pathogen that attacked their metallic skin, causing it to corrode slowly and painfully. But the real horror wasn't the physical damage. The weapon somehow carried psychological components that made affected individuals broadcast their suffering to their entire social networks, spreading panic far beyond the actual infection zones. Velnara watched in growing horror as her own species' colonies received similar treatment. The human version of biological warfare targeted not just Sithrak physiology, but their cultural structures. The pathogen affected their ability to maintain social hierarchies, causing entire civilizations to collapse into chaos as basic social functions failed. "This is impossible," she hissed to Crix. "How could they know enough about our biology to create such specific weapons? They've only been in contact with our species for decades." Crix had no answer. His own forces were dealing with human AI constructs that had proven far more sophisticated than anything the Vraxians had created. These artificial minds didn't simply attack computer systems. They understood psychology well enough to manipulate individual crew members through personalized terror campaigns. One Corithian commander reported that the human AI had somehow accessed his personal files and was broadcasting his childhood fears throughout his ship. The messages weren't random terror tactics. They were carefully crafted psychological profiles designed to break his specific mind. But the true horror of human warfare revealed itself when Morrison's forces began their civilian population campaigns. Rather than simply targeting civilians for destruction, human forces launched psychological warfare operations that turned entire worlds against their own governments. The human approach was terrifyingly thorough. They had apparently studied every species in the coalition, identifying not just their biological weaknesses but their cultural pressure points. their social structures, and their deepest psychological vulnerabilities. The campaigns they launched didn't just cause panic. They caused complete societal breakdown. On Vraxian worlds, human broadcasts played on their species' natural tendency toward crystal formation hierarchies, but twisted the process to create competing power structures that led to civil war. On Carithian planets, the messages exploited their connection to planetary geology, somehow convincing populations that their own worlds were rejecting them. The Delarians, who prided themselves on their psionic abilities, found themselves facing human psionic warfare that was not only more powerful than their own but actively malicious. Human psionicists didn't simply overwhelm their opponents' minds. They rewrote them, turning Delarian telepaths into weapons against their own people. In the observation deck, the alien students watched in stunned silence as the simulation showed their representative species not just losing but being systematically destroyed in ways that demonstrated humanity's complete understanding of how to break their civilizations. A young Thrakari student, her multiple eyes wide with shock, whispered to her companion, "How do they know so much about us? How could they create weapons this specific?" Her question was answered when Commander Hayes activated the chamber's historical display system. New holographic images appeared alongside the simulation, showing real footage from humanity's early interstellar conflicts. "What you're witnessing," Hayes announced to the assembly, "is a recreation of humanity's military capabilities from approximately 300 years ago. Before we developed our current military doctrine, every weapon you've seen, every tactic being used represents actual human military development from our early expansion period." The historical footage was devastating. It showed first contact scenarios where human forces had systematically conquered species after species, not through superior firepower but through superior understanding of their enemies. Each conquest followed the same pattern. Humans would initially appear peaceful and curious, asking endless questions about alien biology, psychology, and culture. Then, when conflicts arose, humanity would deploy weapons and tactics so precisely targeted that resistance became psychologically impossible. Entire civilizations surrendered, not because their military forces were destroyed, but because their populations could no longer function under the psychological pressure of human warfare methods. The footage showed Altarian worlds where human psychological campaigns had convinced the naturally peaceful population that their own diplomatic nature was a disease that needed to be cured through human guidance. It showed ethereal gas-form beings whose energy patterns had been disrupted so thoroughly that they begged for human help to maintain their basic existence. Most disturbing were the records from species that no longer existed as independent civilizations. The humans hadn't destroyed them through genocide or conquest in any traditional sense. Instead, they had made these species psychologically dependent on human guidance, effectively erasing their cultural identity while keeping them physically intact. Counselor Thane, who had maintained his neutrality throughout the simulation, finally spoke. His voice carried the weight of his advanced age and diplomatic experience. "These are historical records?" "Completely accurate," Hayes confirmed. "Archived from our own military databases. Every tactic you've witnessed in the simulation was used by human forces during our expansion period." "But why show us this?" asked a Carithian professor, his rocky features showing obvious distress. "Why reveal such capabilities?" Hayes looked out at the assembly of students and faculty, his tired eyes moving from face to face. "Because someone needs to understand why humanity says no to certain paths. We've seen where those paths lead. We've walked them to their end." In the simulation chamber, the war game was reaching its conclusion. The alien coalition's forces had collapsed completely, not through military defeat but through psychological and social destruction. Crix's final transmission was barely coherent, a desperate plea for mercy from someone whose entire understanding of warfare had been shattered. Captain Morrison's response was gentle but firm. "Coalition forces, stand down and prepare to receive humanitarian aid. Your forces will be treated according to standard prisoner of war protocols, and your civilian populations will receive full medical and psychological support." The simulation ended not with humanity's military victory, but with human medical and relief ships moving to assist the populations they had just demonstrated they could destroy. The juxtaposition was deliberate and powerful. The same forces capable of such precise destruction were now providing equally precise aid and comfort. Lisa stood up in the observation deck, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. The restrictions you mocked aren't our weakness. They're the chains we forged to contain something we never want to unleash again. She paused, looking around at her fellow students, many of whom could no longer meet her eyes. We didn't develop those restrictions because we couldn't win wars. We developed them because we won them too completely. The weight of this revelation settled over the entire assembly. The human students they had mocked, as weak and naive, were representatives of a species that had consciously chosen to limit itself after discovering the ultimate consequences of unrestricted military development. Alex added quietly, every species on our restricted weapons list represents something we created, perfected, and ultimately chose never to use again. Not because we couldn't, but because we realized what we were becoming. The simulation chamber fell completely silent except for the quiet hum of the machinery powering down. In that silence, every being present was forced to confront an uncomfortable question. What did it mean to be part of a galaxy where the most peaceful species was also potentially the most dangerous? The simulation chamber remained silent for several long minutes after the war game ended. Students and faculty who had entered expecting to witness human military inadequacy instead sat in stunned contemplation of what they had actually seen. The betting pools closed without payouts, their organizers too shaken to continue treating the demonstration as entertainment. Commander Hayes waited for the silence to settle completely before continuing his explanation. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries of human history and the burden of knowledge that came with it. The weapons and tactics you witnessed represent only a fraction of what humanity developed. During our early expansion period, he said, activating new displays that showed additional historical records. We mastered not just the art of destroying our enemies, but the science of making them destroy themselves. The new footage was even more disturbing than what had come before. It showed human forces that had learned to turn species' greatest strengths into their most catastrophic weaknesses. Naturally, telepathic species found their mental connections turned into weapons of mass psychological warfare. Highly social species discovered their cultural bonds transformed into chains of control. Most shocking was the footage of humanity's approach to species that considered themselves naturally superior warriors. The records showed how humans had dealt with the Korthak Empire, a militaristic civilization that had once controlled nearly 1,000 worlds through conquest and intimidation. The humans hadn't fought the Korthak military directly. Instead, they had studied Korthak warrior culture until they understood it better than the Korthak themselves. Then they had introduced concepts that made traditional Korthak honor codes impossible to maintain, causing the entire empire to collapse into internal conflicts over what constituted honorable behavior. We didn't destroy the Korthak Empire, Hayes explained as the footage showed once proud warriors reduced to psychological confusion. We simply made them question everything they believed about themselves, until they could no longer function as a unified culture. Velnara, who had participated in the simulation, finally found her voice. How could you know so much about species you had just encountered? The weapons you used against us were too specific, too precisely targeted. Hayes looked directly at her, and for the first time since the demonstration began, his expression showed something that might have been sympathy. We learned by asking questions. Lots and lots of questions. He activated another display that showed early human diplomatic missions. First contact protocols for humanity have always emphasized cultural exchange and scientific cooperation. We wanted to learn everything about every species we encountered, their biology, their psychology, their social structures, their deepest beliefs and fears. The alien students began to understand the horrible implications. Every friendly question human diplomats had asked, every cultural exchange program, every scientific collaboration had been gathering information that could be weaponized if necessary. You studied us, Crick said, his metallic voice showing strain. Every interaction, every conversation, every moment of friendship was intelligence gathering. Not originally, Hayes replied. Our curiosity was genuine. We really did want to understand and cooperate with other species, but once we learned how to use that knowledge as a weapon, we couldn't unknown it. Lisa stood again, addressing her fellow students directly. That's why our restrictions exist. Not to limit what we can do to enemies, but to remind us constantly of what we choose not to do to friends. She gestured toward the simulation chamber, where the holographic star system was slowly fading. Every species in this room has shared their culture with us. You've told us about your families, your fears, your dreams, your weaknesses. You've done it because you trusted us. The weight of this trust suddenly felt overwhelming to every alien in the room. They realized that their human classmates knew exactly how to destroy not just their military forces, but their entire civilizations. And they had gained this knowledge through friendship and cooperation. Alex added quietly, "Our military restrictions aren't just rules about warfare. They're promises we make to every species we encounter, promises that we won't use their trust against them, no matter what happens." Counselor Thane, who had been silent during most of the explanation, finally spoke. "This knowledge you possess about other species, do all humans have access to it?" Hayes nodded grimly. "It's part of our historical archives, available to any human who seeks military or diplomatic training. We don't hide our past, but we do teach why we chose to move beyond it." "How do you live with such knowledge?" asked a young ethereal student, her gaseous form flickering with distress. "How do you choose restraint when you could choose dominion?" Jake Morrison, who had commanded the human forces in the simulation, answered this question. "The same way any moral being makes ethical choices. One decision at a time, every single day." He looked around the room at faces that showed varying degrees of fear, respect, and confusion. "Our restrictions aren't just military doctrine. They're a constant reminder of what we could become if we stopped making the choice to be better." The demonstration concluded with Hayes showing one final piece of historical footage. This recording was different from the others, showing not human military victories but the moment when humanity had chosen to change course. The footage showed a meeting of human military and political leaders 3 centuries earlier, immediately after humanity's last unrestricted military campaign. The leaders looked at reports of their complete victory over the Jaxic Confederation, a militant species that had threatened several human colonies. But instead of celebrating their victory, the humans in the recording looked sickened by their own success. The Jaxic hadn't just been defeated. They had been psychologically broken so thoroughly that they had requested absorption into human space rather than continue existing as an independent species. "We realized that we had become something monstrous," said one of the historical figures in the recording. "We had turned the act of making friends into a weapon of conquest. We were winning wars not through superior force, but through superior manipulation of the beings who had trusted us." The recording showed the development of humanity's first military restrictions, written not by defeated enemies but by victorious humans who were horrified by their own capabilities. Each restriction represented a specific tactic or weapon that humanity had voluntarily abandoned after realizing its ultimate consequences. "Our restrictions aren't chains imposed on us by others," Hayes concluded. "They're chains we forged ourselves to ensure we never again become what we were capable of being." The silence that followed lasted for nearly an hour. Students began leaving the observation deck in small groups, most of them avoiding eye contact with their human classmates. The easy mockery of the previous days had been replaced by something more complex, a mixture of respect, fear, and uncertainty about what their relationships with humans actually meant. Over the following days, the Academy's atmosphere changed completely. The forum posts mocking human military doctrine disappeared, replaced by careful, respectful discussions of military ethics and the role of restraint in warfare. Students who had previously joked about human weaknesses now spoke quietly about human choices. Crix found Alex in the Academy's observation lounge several days later. The Zentorian sat down without invitation, staring out at the stars visible through the large windows. "I keep thinking about what your commander said," Crix began, his voice much quieter than usual, "about walking certain paths to their end and choosing to be better." Alex looked up from his studies. "It bothers you. It terrifies me," Crix admitted. "Not just what you showed us you could do, but the fact that you choose not to do it. Every day with every interaction, you make the choice to be friends instead of conquerors." Alex was quiet for a moment, considering his response. "The choice isn't just about being friends. It's about being worthy of friendship." "What do you mean?" "Trust has to be earned," Alex explained. "Every species in the galaxy has chosen to share space with humanity, to trade with us, to study alongside us. They made that choice because they believe we can be trusted with their friendship. Our restrictions exist to prove that their trust isn't misplaced. Crix nodded slowly, understanding beginning to show in his expression. Your strength isn't in what you can do, it's in what you choose not to do. Exactly, Alex agreed. Real strength sometimes lies in restraint. Real power sometimes means helping others grow stronger rather than making them weaker. They sat together in comfortable silence, looking out at the stars that represented countless civilizations living together in peace. For the first time since the demonstration, the future felt hopeful rather than frightening. The lesson of the simulation spread far beyond the academy. Within months, military colleges across the galaxy were incorporating discussions of ethical restraint into their curricula. The concept that true military strength might require voluntary limitations became a subject of serious study rather than mockery. And in quiet conversations throughout the galaxy, beings who had once joked about human restrictions began to understand them as something far more profound. Proof that even the most powerful species could choose to be worthy of trust, rather than simply demanding it through FE.